In this video, we'll go over hidden interactions you probably didn't know about certain spells and abilities that existed in the game at one point or another. And at number 10, we'll start off with something pretty light, and that's hibernating druids. You see, druids have this ability called hibernate, which on a quick cast time allows you to put a beast or dragonkin to sleep. And since it's limited to 2 specific types, it's not the most useful CC in the world, and only really exists for incredibly niche situations and raids and dungeons. That is until you remember that a couple of player things are considered beasts at one point or another. The more common thing would be a hunter's pet, which is obviously considered a beast and therefore susceptible to hibernate. Druids themselves are also considered beasts when in a lot of their transformed states, and can be put to sleep with hibernate. And a third, little less commonly known thing, is that shamans in ghost wolf form are also treated as beasts, and can in fact be put to sleep with hibernate. So I'm pretty sure most druids know that they're susceptible to hibernate, since that is a spell they know, but I'm sure most people didn't know that shamans could also be targeted by the spell as well, which is a neat little hidden interaction with the ability. Of course, these things also work with Hunter's Scare Beast ability, which should be added back to the game in Shadowlands. Speaking of hunters, at number 9 we have Disengage hopping. You see, hunters have this ability called Disengage, which lets them jump backwards and is a pretty good ability for getting out of melee range in PvP, or to kite easier in PvE. But if you're skilled enough, you can actually flip your character around midair in a jump, use Disengage to go forward, and then just turn your character around to land in the same direction. This is kind of a complex maneuver to pull off and literally cannot be done if you're a keyboard turner, because it's not possible to spin your character around fast enough without using your mouse. And in fact, you'll see most high-level hunters using their Disengage to go forward more than they use it to go backwards, or to avoid certain mechanics and raids. I remember when I was watching the world first kill on Alakir, and all of the hunters in the raid group completely ignored the tornado mechanic by simply jumping off the platform and then disengaging back on around the tornado wall. And playing a hunter at the time, I knew that was something I was not good enough to do consistently. It was way too hard to consistently disengage hop forward, let alone do it while pulling max DPS at an angle where messing up meant losing a bunch of DPS or sometimes death. Although this is a pretty well-known interaction, it's just a hard one to do, which is why it's kind of lower on this list. And at number 8, we have Mind Control Dots. This little interaction used to be a lot more powerful before Mists of Pandaria, when they severely nerfed the damage of a Shadow Priest's dots. You see, there's this little interaction that most people don't know about, where the CC Mind Control does not break on damage. But since your character can't do anything while the control is up, and the target is treated as friendly to other enemies, this isn't really a big deal. Generally, you can just kick the priest and end the mind control, or just attack the priest that's vulnerable to everything since he's just sitting there channeling. When this becomes important is during one-on-one duels. You see, what a Shadow Priest could do was simply put all of their dots on a target and then mind control them for the full duration, and just simply let the dots tick. A Shadow Priest's dots used to account for about half of their damage, so this was about a 10-second window where they couldn't do anything while getting dealt about half their health and dot damage, in which case the Shadow Priest could then just do it again, then just mind control them for a second time with a DR, and eventually whittle them down to the point where they're low enough HP where they could finish them off normally. But since this isn't a very useful thing and only really applies to duels, solo content, and one-on-one PvP situations, something the game is not balanced around, it was never a big deal. But it was a fun little hidden interaction to do that is still technically possible today. And at number 7, we have Lichborne Healing. Now, this is strictly an old school spell interaction, as it's no longer a thing in BFA, which involved a Death Knight's ability called Lichborne and one of the runic power spenders, Death Coil. You see, Lichborne's an ability that allowed Death Knights to temporarily be treated as undead, and generally been a buff throughout the years, where it would give them a passive Will of the Forsaken ability, making them immune to certain CC effects, and give them other benefits, like reducing damage, increasing speed, although currently I think it reduces your speed when you use it. And Death Coil was an ability that had 2 functions. One of them was to deal damage at range with your runic power, a resource that Death Knights generate passively when using their runes to hit stuff. And Death Coil had this other niche interaction where it could be used to heal friendly undead targets, which generally just meant your ghoul, and since most people did not need to ever heal their pet, a lot of people just kind of forgot that Death Coil had this second interaction. Except PvP Death Knights. They remembered very well about the second interaction, as what they could do was use Lichborne to consider themselves as undead, and then just spam Death Coil on themselves in order to heal up to full. Death Coil would actually heal them for a decent amount, and it was instant cast, so there was no need to worry about being interrupted. So, Death Knights would just make sure they had a full bar of runic power, pop Lichborne, and then just heal themselves nearly full with a couple of global cooldowns targeted on themselves. Now, I know this sounds like a very obvious interaction, but Lichborne used to be just a talent that you could pick up, and it wasn't a baseline ability. Even today, it's a PvP talent, so it was kind of a niche interaction that almost never applied to PvE situations. It was kind of one of those things only PvP players knew about on the whole, which I think will be the case for a lot of the things on this list. And at number 6, we have Mage's Polymorphs. Now, in this section, we'll have two little hidden interactions with Polymorph. One of them is for the healing factor. A Polymorph heals you for quite a bit while you're under its effect. So, if you notice a warrior with a spell reflection up, and you're low on hit points, in this incredibly niche and time-specific situation, you could cast Polymorph in order to intentionally polymorph yourself to heal up. Although this other interaction is a lot more fun. You see, in Vanilla WoW, before PvP durations existed on Polymorph in the open world, you could polymorph a player for the full 50 seconds, and then just kind of keep them polymorphed until you got bored. Although there was this one little hidden interaction where if you managed to polymorph someone underwater, and then kept them there long enough, you could drown them eventually. You see, Polymorph does heal you up for quite a bit pretty fast. I think it's something like 10% of your HP a second, but drowning damage is faster than that. So devious mages could easily keep someone underwater for the full 60 seconds needed to drown them, and then eventually watch them die. Now, this was kind of fixed pretty early on in the game, and it was quite a long feat to accomplish. But then again, people who like to world PvP are all about wasting other people's time, so I doubt that was too much of a concern. And at number 5, we have Distracting Cliifs. Rogues have this ability called Distract, which allows you to turn mobs around to the location that you put the distract to. And its most useful application is to allow you to sneak past mobs a little bit easier, or to get patrolling mobs to stop patrolling so that you can sneak by easier. In PvP though, Distract isn't as useful, since it only works on targets who are not in combat. So the best thing you could do is to turn someone around, or to turn them to the side to maybe let them know that a rogue is nearby, to put them on their guard, which isn't super useful. What is useful is doing this when they're running across a bridge or near a cliff, as if they're not attentive enough, you can turn them towards the cliff and then they'll just run off themselves. This little interaction turns Distract, which is usually kind of a useless ability in PvP, to potentially a 1 global cooldown kill ability in the right situation. And at number 4, we have Cyclone Healing. Cyclone is a Druid ability, which is probably one of the best CCs in PvP, as what it does is it allows you to cast an ability that puts an enemy player into a Cyclone for around 7 seconds, where during this duration, they're immune to everything and can't act. The only way to get out of Cyclone is with a full-on immunity or PvP trinket, as there's no way to really dispel it with any other kind of ability in the game. It's a pretty extreme form of crowd control, which is very useful for locking down other players when you kill someone else. Although there is this little hidden interaction with it that a lot of Druid players know about in arenas, where players who are caught in a Cyclone are immune to everything, but buffs and other short duration effects still continue their timers, and you also cannot be healed while in a Cyclone. So what some Druids would do, under incredibly situational circumstances, was actually use Cyclone on targets who were low on health. That way the healer would blow all their best heals on them and potentially waste a couple of cooldowns, as you don't really expect the low HP target to be the target of a Cyclone. And this would also allow any HOTS to fall off of them, so that they came out of the Cyclone, they'd have absolutely no healing whatsoever, or any kind of beneficial buffs. And then if you simply just use another crowd control on the healer, you'd have a ripe, low health DPS player with no lingering protection on them for a much easier kill. Although most of the time it was more efficient to just throw Cyclones on the healers and then burst down the other player you were trying to kill rather than Cyclone on the low HP target. But it was definitely a tactical way to use the ability in some situations, which could be used to great effect if you knew about this hidden interaction. And at number 3, we have the Monk's Transcendence. Transcendence is an ability that monks can use, where they set up this little spirit somewhere, and as long as they're within a certain range of that spirit, usually around 30 to 40 yards, they can teleport to the location regardless of line of sight. Basically, just like the Warlock's teleport ability. However, there's this little interaction that monk players have which really doesn't apply to Warlocks, where monks can tank bosses, and they have a taunt available to them. So if a monk simply sets a Transcendence outside the raid room before you get locked in during the fight, and you need to reset the boss because you failed a mechanic or want to try something else, the monk tank or player can simply taunt the boss, run to the entrance of the room, and then Transcendence out of the boss room. And most of the time this will just cause the boss to reset, as most bosses are designed to reset if they leave their boss room. Because players exploited the fact that bosses didn't used to do this in Cataclysm with the Atramedes fight, in order to completely trivialize it by avoiding all of the fight's mechanics inside the hallway before the boss room. Now, resetting a boss fight isn't the most game-breaking thing in the world, and it doesn't work on every boss, and it requires the monk to actually not be one of the first ones to die, but it can be a convenient way to get more boss attempts in if that boss is a particularly difficult first phase of a fight or something. And at number 2, we have Feign Death Pet Naming. Feign Death is an ability that hunters have, which allows them to play dead, and removes them from combat, and also, more crucially in PvP situations, forces players to untarget them. So Feign Death can be used to cause spell interruptions if you're able to feign death before cast goes off, because they'll no longer have a target. And another more niche, situationally useful part of this is that most of the time in some stressful PvP situations, players will just auto-target something else whenever they're spamming their abilities. And it's kind of hard to forcefully click on the dead hunter's body if you're not in a PvP situation where you can just click on their raid frames. So if you simply name your pet exactly after your hunter's name, you could trick someone who's just spamming tab to target you again, or gets auto-target after they lose the target, to maybe attack your pet once or twice before they notice they have the wrong target. It doesn't work on everyone, but I've done this a lot in the past, and it's really easy to fool people with this in Battlegrounds or other less competitive PvP situations. Which is why half of the pets on my old hunter main are named after my hunter, because people will just auto-target my pet and then never swap back to me. And at number 1, we have the Shadow Word Death trick. Shadow Word Death is an ability that priests have, which when using a target that it did not kill, it would do the damage back to the priest equal to the damage it dealt. Now, this damage was never very much and was kind of meant as an execute ability over the years, and constantly got changed every expansion to do something else. But for a long time, it kept this little interaction where it would deal some damage back to you. So what priests would do in PvP was tactically use this blowback damage to break certain CCs on themselves, because the damage dealt back to you was not immediate. There was about a half-second delay from when it dealt damage to when it dealt the damage back to you. So if you knew a mage was about to polymorph you, you could time your Shadow Word Death to attack the mage the instant they finish their cast, which would then do the instant damage to the mage, and then half a second later do the damage back to you in your polymorph state, which would then break the polymorph since it breaks on any form of damage. And this is kind of like Disengage hopping, where it was an incredibly high-level thing to accomplish. But if you were a good priest with great timing, you could essentially break certain forms of CC on yourself every 10 seconds, which was the cooldown of Shadow Word Death most of the time. Currently in BFA, Shadow Word Death is only a Shadow Priest talent that deals no damage back to you, and can only be used on targets that are on low health. However, in the Shadowlands Alpha, currently Shadow Word Death works like its old version where it can be used on any health mobs, and deals the damage back to you about half a second later. So this little interaction might be returning to the game sometime soon, assuming they don't change something. Alright, and that's the list. Now, there's a lot of little hidden interactions with abilities in the game, so there's a good chance I probably missed a few. If you know of any other really good ones I might have missed, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one. And also, did you know only 34.2% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel?